Okay, so this series of videos is about the analyst portion of the ISTE standards. So here's the analyst part that we're going to understand and use data to drive instruction and support students in achieving their learning goals. I want you to notice the emphasis on students here and their own goals. So the first is providing alternative ways to demonstrate competency and reflect on their learning. Then we're going to use technology for a variety of formative and summative assessments, which I'm going to talk about as well, about accommodating learner needs, providing feedback, and then informing instruction. And then using assessment data to guide progress and communicate with others, and to build student self-direction again. All right, so this first part of the video is mostly going to be on 2.7c, and then the second part is going to be more on the A and B. Because this first part, we're going to talk specifically about assessment and data, and then we're going to talk more about authentic assessments and alternative assessments. So assessment and data. So first of all, there's two primary types of assessment that educators usually talk about. The first is formative. So you might think of a chef. When a chef is cooking, they might taste their dish as they go. And they taste the dish to try to decide what to do next, if they want to add more salt or some other spice. That's what formative assessment is. It's getting a little sampling of how students are doing, what they're understanding, that can then inform what you're going to do next and what adjustments you need to make. The other type is summative, and that's kind of like in cooking shows when they have in front of judges and the judges taste the final product and do a judgment on it. Summative is kind of like when you give a test at the end of a unit to find out overall how students performed and to maybe give them a grade or decide whether or not they should progress to the next grade. That's summative. Now, in reality, just because something's summative doesn't mean that it's not going to inform future instruction. So really, I think it's a spectrum between formative assessment and summative assessment, because this cook is going to use what feedback he gets from the judges for the next time he makes something. So I don't think it's as clear-cut as sometimes we make it, but those are the two main types. So next question is, why are we doing this? Why are we assessing? And there's a few reasons. One, so that we continually adapt and refine instruction. That's that formative assessment. So we know how students are doing and we can help them do better. Another is to actually target individual students who are struggling. So assessments can help us identify which students are learning to read well and which ones aren't, which students might need intervention with certain skills. It also can support student reflection and self-directed learning. Remember that in the ISTE standards. Students can see their scores, and that can help them know what to focus on, what to direct their learning on. Kind of like you took the Technology Integration Competency Survey, and that gave you scores that you could use to direct your own learning. That's where that comes from. And then finally, you can use it to evaluate the learning design in your own teaching. So you can use that to improve. If I can look and see what my students do and use that to improve what I do as a teacher and how I design activities and courses and such. So assessment requires data. We have to have some type of information that we can do this formative and summative assessment with. And we usually think of that as quantitative data. So that's things like test scores, quiz scores. It could be percentages like attendance percentages or other types of numeric measures. It's important, though, to also think about qualitative data. When a teacher hears a student answer a question, they immediately make a judgment about whether or not to continue on that topic or to move on to something else. When a teacher sees a student staring out the window, that helps them make a judgment about how well instruction is going and whether or not students are engaged. And those are really valuable indicators that I think we need to remember. Other qualitative things are like open-ended responses or essays, or when students create things and make things. That gives us really good information about what they know. It's just not this quantitative numeric data. Quantitative data is more, you can look at their engagement level in learning activities, especially with technologies. You can see how much time they spend on different activities. Performance assessments like tests, interaction, what they do with different tools. And there's actually a little bit of a trend now to start tracking student behavior. And you can think about whether you agree with doing that or not. It's a little bit murky whether that's appropriate. But we tend as a society, at least in the United States, we tend to focus on this quantitative numeric data because it's easy and it's a hard number that seems true no matter what, and it's easy to compare. But just because it's easy doesn't necessarily mean it's the best or most accurate way of understanding how students learn. So just something to think about. Okay, so now remember the PICRAP matrix. When we're talking about assessment, of course, teachers have been assessing long before the current digital technologies. But what can current digital technologies do to help us with this assessment and data collection? So we're going to look at this on the PICRAP matrix. So if we start here, here's some different tools we could have. One is Edpuzzle, which I use a lot. I'm having students answer questions as I go. Nearpod and Pear Deck are similar. You can actually use this in live teaching so that, I used to use it when I taught freshmen. I could ask a question and they'd all answer it on the Pear Deck on their devices. And then I could see a summary of all the students' responses right in front of me and use that to inform what we do next or to talk more about certain issues. It's a similar thing like Whiteboard Fi, where students basically have their own individual digital whiteboard. They can write the response and the teacher sees them all in one place. So these can be used for open-ended responses, and it can also be used for multiple choice or true or false that have absolute answers. And if it's true or false, multiple choice, it can immediately tell the student whether they were right or wrong after they answer. So think about where you would put this on the PICRAP matrix. So I would probably put this in Amplify because I think it's doing something that good teachers have always done, whether it's asking students to do thumbs up, thumbs down, asking who does and doesn't understand. But it does it in a more efficient way that gives the teacher data up front. So I think that's amplification. You could make a case that it's transforming. And then I think it depends on how it's used. It's either interactive or creative. I think if you're actually having students like create something real and demonstrate it, you could maybe do creative, but usually we use it in a more interactive way. Okay, here's the next. Oh, I skipped one. Here's the next ones. So these, I Ready, Imagine, Learning, Achieve 3000. These are software programs, like let's just say it's a reading program. So students work on it individually. So they might spend some time reading passages and answering questions, and then the software would determine how well they have developed certain skills. And then it gives them targeted instruction based on what they need help with. So it might identify a student as struggling with identifying the main idea. So then it might give them more content or more teaching on the main idea until they can pass the assessment. And it also might give the teacher information, give them a report that says these students are struggling with main idea. Where would you put that on PICRAP? Okay, so same thing with this one. I think it can be amplify or transform. And I think they're always interactive. It could almost be passive. I think interactive requires that the student actually know whether or not they got something wrong. And these usually do that, where they get a response back when they answer something. So it would probably be interactive. I don't think very many of them get to the creative sphere. So I think it's more, I would still say interactive amplifying, but you could say transform. Okay, one more. So these are a little bit different. These are more for administrators at school. So Clever, some of you might know Clever as something that provides a single sign-on so that students can access all their apps and stuff from one screen instead of having separate passwords and usernames. But it also provides some analytics where administrators can see how different devices are being used and how much time. And it also might, in some cases, provide some student data on progress. And this is a power school, which they're starting to develop more analytics for different levels, including like this predictive early warning. It might identify students with lower grades or lower test scores or absences and be able to tell the administration, watch out for this student. They might be struggling. Let's make sure they're okay. So this one is a little bit different because we don't have a student relationship to the technology. Really, we only have like an administrator's use. But what would you say? Would you say that the administrator's use, is it going to replace, amplify, or transform traditional practice? I think it primarily is amplify, although there could be some transformation, especially if they're using artificial intelligence to get some insights about students that wouldn't be available otherwise. But you have to be cautious about that because it's not always accurate or a good thing. In fact, here we go. We need to use caution. And I can say this because I used to work for an educational technology company that created one of these products that I showed you today. So one thing to know is these companies that create these products, there's no standard or oversight. There's no one trying to make sure that everything's correct other than them themselves and their businesses. They're trying to make money. And they're experimenting and still figuring out how to do this. We don't really know how well this works overall yet. And so you have to know that whenever you're using these tools, there might be bugs, there might be things that just don't work like they're supposed to work. So I would say never rely only on the data from one of these programs. Always look at several sources. And the other is potential bias. It's really easy for different algorithms or different tools to become biased against certain types or groups of students, certain races or socioeconomic status or nationalities and such. And we don't always know why, but it ends up being baked into the artificial intelligence. So it's really important to watch out for that. And again, just always use multiple sources of data whenever you're making significant decisions about students. All right, the next video will go into authentic assessment.